friends, welcome to another installment of Strange Planet. And don't forget, give us a 5-star review and leave a comment. It helps spread the word. On this episode, the war on raw milk. Was pasteurization a medical miracle or a Trojan horse? Did we throw away an ancient healing art in the name of progress? And is the war on raw milk just the latest front in the battle to control your health? Forrest Maready is with us today, and he's no stranger to controversy because he specializes in uncovering what the establishment would rather keep hidden. Forrest is a best-selling author, independent researcher, and historical detective whose books challenge some of the most sacred assumptions in modern science and medicine. You may know him from The Moth in the Iron Lung, where he re-examined the true origins of polio, or the autism vaccine, which took on Big Pharma's role in one of the greatest medical tragedies of our time. He's written about crooked spines, tribal instincts, even the corrupted theology of modern Christianity. But today, Forrest turns his penetrating lens to something far more ancient and far more personal. His new book is titled The Germ in the Dairy Pail, the 200-year war on the world's most amazing food, milk. And what a war it's been. This is not a book about dairy in the nutritional sense. This is a spiritual, political, and biological expose on how milk, the very first food we consume as human beings, was industrialized, sterilized, demonized, and ultimately weaponized by the technocratic forces who believe they know better than nature. And he traces the forgotten history of milk as medicine, how people once chose milk from specific cows on specific pastures to heal specific diseases. He walks us through the 19th century scandals where sick, imprisoned cows fed on whiskey waste produced a toxic brew that killed thousands of children in New York. And then, shockingly, he shows how the same government that failed to stop that horror now criminalizes raw milk from clean, grass-fed farms. He reveals that milk is not just a beverage, it's a biological conversation between species, between man and animal, between mother and child. A conversation we've all but silenced in the name of safety, science, and scalability. From Amish farmers being raided at dawn to lab-grown synthetic dairy produced without a cow in sight, the germ in the dairy pail isn't just the story of milk. It's the story of how far we've fallen from the land, from the animals we once honored, and from the food that once healed us. Forrest Maready, welcome back to Strange Planet. How are you?
Thanks, Richard. Well, I'm actually amazing after an intro like that. You never cease to amaze me with your intros. So if only I felt that good about myself all the time. But you've really built me up quite a bit here. I'm happy to be here. Another interesting subject to talk about, obviously.
Yes, you've done it again, I must say. You open the book with 2 raids, one on a 19th century swill milk distillery, and I'll ask you what that is, and then the other on an Amish farm in 2011. First of all, what is a swill milk distillery?
Well, as the population grew in the United States, they needed to produce more milk on less land and for cheaper. If you can imagine, all industrial progress sort of follows these lines. Mm-hmm. And if you trace it back to the war on 1812, when rum stopped coming into the country due to the blockades from the war, entrepreneurs in America started making whiskey, and they needed factories to do this, and they had a lot of waste coming out of these factories, and it made sense to them to feed it to animals. And in cities like New York, very crowded, lots of people there, lots of children being born there all the time, they needed lots of milk. And so they started feeding the cows on the waste from these whiskey distilleries. They called it swill. And problems had already been brewing in the production of milk, but this was decidedly a huge turn for the worse in terms of the quality of milk that cows were able to produce. And so, as you mentioned, the opening of the book talks about a raid by journalists, of all people, because parents had been complaining that their children were getting sick from the milk. And as per usual, the doctors wouldn't listen to them and wouldn't believe them, and government health officials wouldn't believe them. So some journalists actually snuck into one of these infamous Swill distilleries and went into the barn, into the stables where all these cows were being kept, and were horrified at what they saw. And they even took an illustrator with them. Obviously, no photographs back then, 1850s, 1840s. So they took an illustrator with them to try and capture the horror of what was going on in there. And it was horrible. So that's the first raid. And then, ironically, there's another raid that I document, 2011. An Amish farmer named Dan Allgaier had his farm raided by government officials for the exact opposite reason. There was nothing wrong with the milk he was producing. It was very clean. The cows were being treated humanely. It was on pasture-fed grass. There was no hygiene problem. There was no problem with animal cruelty. There were no diseases running rampant. But he refused to pasteurize the milk, which is what a lot of people prefer. They don't want the milk pasteurized. And the government, the FDA, raided his farm. Complete takedown in the early morning. And in fact, it was a 3-stage raid with his house and some another store that sold some of his milk happening at the same time. So the juxtaposition of a raid taking place in the 1840s to try and uncover the problem with absolutely corrupted milk, and then full circle 150, 60 years later, the government shutting down a farmer because it was too pure in a way. It's just too ironic to not just shake your head at. So I thought, in the spirit of trying to make a compelling story, I'll start off with that and just try and tick people off as to the absolute insanity of how far we've come from the swill milk of 1840s to the modern raids of people trying to make healthy milk.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the contrast. What does it say about how far we've strayed, not just from real food, but just from common sense?
Yeah, it's unfortunately, you and I have talked about this before, but science in general is a weird field of study, in that the solution to anything that science is able to uncover involves more science. It's never a rewind. There is never a rewind button on anything science discovers. Often the case is we just need to dial it back. Let's just go back to the way we were doing it and everything would be fine. Unfortunately, science is not just discovery. It's also, I'll quote, in the air of progress, in that the discovery yields more information where human intelligence and curiosity can't help itself. Where the solution may have just been a simple hit the rewind button, an RTZ, if you've ever used the return to zero on a studio recorder. We can't do that with science. Science says, no, the solution is more science. We will find a way to solve the problem or solve the symptom rather than addressing the problem. So milk, for sure, is an absolute masterclass in science, solving a symptom over and over and over again. In fact, I talk about it in the book. There's 3 or 4 or 5 stages of absolute hilarity at causing problems and science coming to the rescue with yet more science. So, yeah, we just don't do a good job as human beings rewinding, going back to the way things were that were actually better. The allure of industrialization, of more profit, more efficiency, is just too much for humans to bear. I mean, we are efficiency-seeking machines. I know I am. I try and mow my yard in as little time as possible, and I'm always looking for ways to cut corners. So it's natural. It's in our instinct. But unfortunately, when it comes to people's health, something as crucial to infant nutrition as milk, we need to be much more careful. And unfortunately, we weren't. We absolutely destroyed what was nature's most nutritious food.
You write in the book that milk once held such healing power that doctors prescribed milk from cows grazing on specific pastures. And then today, milk is treated, raw milk anyway, like a dangerous biohazard. Well, first of all, let's talk about specific cows in specific fields aligned with specific illnesses. That absolutely is mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's always so quaint and endearing to find the relationship farmers had with their animals and even the pastures they grazed. It was so intimate. We can't possibly imagine the subtleties that they were able to pick up on that we can't. We go to the store and buy a gallon of milk that was probably the output of, I don't know, hundreds of different animals all into that one milk jug. We have no idea which cow we're drinking, and it certainly is an amalgam of hundreds of cows. Back then, farmers and their customers were attuned to the certain benefits of what the cows were eating. So a certain pasture may have alfalfa. And at the time, they may have noticed that alfalfa grass and the milk that came from cows that ate it tended to help people with respiratory infections. And in that same way, there may be another pasture that had Timothy hay. And they noticed, hey, if you have an intestinal problem, there's something about the component of this particular grass that seems to help more. Now, over years, decades, hundreds of years, these sorts of things become second nature and no one questions them. It was common sense that certain pastures, and in fact, certain cows from certain pastures, were more suited to certain ailments. We, as our pharmacy-loving modern citizenry, can't believe that that's true. It just doesn't feel possible. But that would have been second nature to them. They would have laughed that we thought that was amazing. They would have treated it as common sense that certain grass through certain cows tended to fare better with certain ailments. So people think that's strange and odd and maybe unbelievable, but it's completely trivial information to a 200 farmer from 200 years ago. They would have never thought that that was strange, that that sort of thing was noticeable or happening.
What happened to that wisdom? Who erased it?
Yeah, it's as is the case with all things, wisdom disappears with industrial processes because you outsource knowledge to a process. And ideally the process is good, and in some cases it is. You know, the industrial revolution was not all bad. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the subtleties of life are such that one size fits all solutions don't work. We've seen this with the vaccination program. You have a vaccination program that I'm not sure who it fits, but it doesn't fit children ideally, and it certainly doesn't fit all children. And you have, in the animal world, you have, you know, tiny 1 ounce puppies that are being given rabies vaccines with the dosage that a greyhound at 140 pounds would get. And these sorts of problems happen anytime you try and gain efficiency through industrialized processes. And again, when it comes to food, particularly food that infants might be consuming, human nature, particularly the maternal instinct, is a far greater arbiter of truth than any industrialized process or recommendations. So you are always going to lose that wisdom. I mean, I have this whole collection back here, the Foxfire books. It's this compendium of, you know, old timer knowledge that a professor in Georgia started gathering from all the local hillbillies and moonshiners and everyone else. And I consider that precious knowledge that, you know, I bought the physical copies. I bought the entire collection for $200 or $300 because I know it's invaluable. It's the old timer wisdom. It is not what you're going to find on Google. It's not what you're going to find in a manual. So yeah, it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate side effect of progress and technology and industrial revolution in that wisdom in terms of human nuance is obliterated in favor of efficiency and scale. And milk certainly proves the problem with that approach more than about anything I've ever studied.
So going back to the raids that open the book, and you make a stunning claim, again, swill milk, which you described, industrial milk, led to children in the 19th century, this is in New York, killed more children than polio. Why isn't that part of public health history?
Well, it's most people don't realize that polio had more to do with pesticides than viruses, because the truth of the matter is polio, the paralysis from polio and other viruses, is a man-made problem. And of course, humans don't like telling that story. We like a good story. We don't like a bad story. Polio is a bad story. Polio is a story of humankind paralyzing their own children through ignorance. And we didn't know what was going on, and we created a vaccine that, according to the myth, saved us from certain doom. So we love that story. In the same way, there is a similar myth that raw milk is inherently unhealthy, full of bacteria that are seeking your death at every moment, and that only through the miracle of pasteurization or heating the milk to whatever, 170 degrees for 30 minutes, only through that medical marvel have we been able to survive the danger of raw milk. The reality is much different than that. We like that story because it's science, winning the day over big bad Mother Nature who's out to kill us. And we like that story. The reality is raw milk, unpasteurized milk, is completely healthy. There was literally zero risk with it until we started industrial farming cows, until we started doing all kinds of things that actually did make the milk dangerous. So again, rather than rewinding and saying, well, hey, what happened here? Why is milk suddenly killing children? We've eaten it, drank it for time eternal with zero problem. Why do no other mammals require their milk to be pasteurized? Why is it just this one animal that needs pasteurized milk? Why do we breastfeed our children and not need to pasteurize that milk? Why does every other mammal on the planet drink raw unpasteurized milk and seem to do fine? So again, we didn't ask the right questions because we loved the story. We loved what we thought was true. And humans are very bad at looking themselves in the mirror and asking the question is, was this our fault? And unfortunately, with polio and with raw milk, it was our fault. It was our own doing. So it's going to be hard for humanity to ever come to a reckoning with that.
And another amazing passage in the book, you talk about cows and humans sharing microbes, hormones, even emotional states. So, I mean, was the original relationship between cows and human almost symbiotic, even perhaps sacred?
Yeah, I think so. And this other book that I just sort of wrapped up talks a lot about this. It starts to sound kind of woo and new agey, and it's very scientific if you want to call it that. But I'm sure your listeners have heard stories of how human mothers naturally tune their breast milk to their children. This goes on unconsciously, subconsciously, I suppose, even to the point where infants who are sick, the mother can pick up on that feedback and then naturally adjust the components of her milk to compensate for whatever sickness the baby has. This is a miracle to me. And I think there is similar relationship, although obviously different in that a farmer's not suckling at the udder of a cow. They're using their hands or a machine. But farmers will gladly tell you that certain cows need certain human milkers. Cows can hold their cream back, which is the most sort of valuable, nutritious part of raw milk. They will hold it back if the right person is not milking them. And again, this sounds impossible. And it's really, the mechanics of it aren't that complicated. The cream rises to the top, so the cream's sitting at the top of their udder. They can contract muscles so that it doesn't freely come down. They're reluctantly giving up their milk. And in fact, sometimes the dairy farmer will give them a shot of oxytocin to kind of relax them so that they'll give up their milk more easily. But you get the wrong farmer in there, the wrong person, and the cow will just say, nope, I'm not giving you my milk. I'm saving it for my calf. And there's definitely a symbiotic relationship with the farmer and the cows, particularly in hand milking situations where cows are very routine oriented. They expect certain people at certain times of day. And when you break that routine, they don't like it. They get nervous. They hold their milk back. So is there more going on? Is there actual microbial exchange going on between farmer and cow? Probably. We don't know that. We haven't studied that. It's beyond the field of science, really, to try and understand that. But I would guess there is something going on symbiotic, certainly between people who drink milk and cows, in that it is a microbial wonder. Raw milk is. I don't think it's a luxury item that hippies and patchouli wearing weirdos drink. It's like an actual beverage that humans probably should all be drinking if you're able to, because it is a symbiotic relationship that's developed between cow and human, or goat and human if you're in certain parts of the world. So yeah, it's a health beverage that I think we actually require. I don't think it's a luxury anymore.
In the book, you argue the problem with milk isn't raw versus pasteurized. It's how we broke the biological relationship between man, animal, and soil. I mean, is that the real war we should be talking about?
Yeah, definitely. We just spent 2 weeks ago, my family, at a farm that's an amazing family that's trying to do it correctly, and they are making all kinds of sacrifices to try and farm in such a way that all health, animal, human, the earth itself, is improved. And they talk a lot about feeding the soil. They start with saying, look, our soil is sick. And you may have read this. There's a book called Defending Beef, which is a gal who was a big ag industrial farmer attorney who started representing some cases against, I think, Bobby Kennedy's river or water. What's the name of his water organization? It was his original River Watch, maybe. Anyway, and she started talking with, the people that they were suing, which were these industrial cattle ranchers, and she realized that they knew more about beef and the land than everyone else, and she became a cattle farmer. She quit her lawsuits against them and became one herself. She was a vegetarian and embraced eating beef because she realized they nurture the soil. They maintain the mineral profile of everything that's grown in soil through the way cattle graze and encourage growth on the plains and everywhere else. So unfortunately, industrial farming has wrecked the soil of our country. Forget the milk, forget the health and everything else. They've wrecked the soil by the way they farm. So this place that we were just at, that's one of their first priorities, is restoring the soil health. And then, of course, the cows will benefit from this, and that's a big part of what they do. And then humans, obviously, who are consumers of the meat and the dairy that they grow there, are also, hopefully will benefit from this. But it's a very tricky process to unwind. They are certainly trying to unwind what we did wrong, and it's very difficult. And God bless them for what they're doing, because they're trying to do it correctly. They're very committed to it.
How did we get here? How did we go from Jefferson prescribing raw milk as medicine to federal agents raiding Amish farms at dawn with search warrants?
Yeah, it's I can sort of give you the 90-second summary. Industrial Revolution brought all kinds of changes. The first real change I mentioned in the book is silos. Silos are a very unsuspecting player in the war on milk, and silos created a scenario in which farmers could use fermented food to feed their cattle. Silos allowed farmers to store up food in huge amounts, stacking it higher and higher and higher, so that during the winter, when grass is not so plentiful, they'd have plenty of feed for the cows. That might sound fine, and I suppose in some ways it is, but unfortunately it changed the nature of cow manure, and it made the stables and the dairy parlors extremely filthy. I mean, extremely filthy. And they didn't think about it at the time. The notion of germs and bacteria wasn't well understood, but inevitably the filth of the manure change started getting into the milk. It got onto their udders. It was on the milkmaid's hands. And the milk started getting unhealthy. they started monoculture farming, particularly corn, which was a big change because of the Industrial Revolution. But previously, a lot of farmers farmed wheat, and you can make bread, and the stalks from the wheat can become bedding for the cattle. They can eat it. It was a very useful tool on the farm, but unfortunately, corn doesn't serve that same purpose. Corn is not quite so nutritious for the cattle. It doesn't work as bedding as well, and things got even worse. So you take that, the silos, the monoculture farming with corn, you add the swill milk distilleries, and the milk that came from that, and just step by step, things start getting worse and worse and worse. Particularly when you commercialize the production of milk and you have dairymen selling to people 60 miles away with no refrigeration to people that they don't know and don't care about and have no accountability with. All kinds of corners are being cut. So all these things start adding up to problems. Unfortunately, this is kind of part and parcel with the Industrial Revolution in that a lot of things bad occurred afterwards. And I'm not totally dissing on the Industrial Revolution, but it is unfortunately the cause of a lot of problems, and certainly the case with milk.
You describe ancient milk traditions. I mean, they sound more like energy medicine than agriculture, like songs for cows, milking by touch, cow-human hormonal communication. I mean, was that science we simply didn't have words for yet?
Well, I don't call that science. This is the other book that maybe we can talk about sometime. I have a new term for this. I call it Centropy. Centropy is the opposite of science. Centropy is the relationship between things. Science studies things. It breaks them down. It reduces them to their most tiny, isolated mechanism possible. And unfortunately, that fails when you're trying to look at the relationship between things. It's not a good way of understanding. And so all these things we've been talking about, symbiotic relationships, cows and farmers, cows and humans that consume the milk, the soil itself, all these things have microbial activity going on in them. And between them, that science is not going to be able to pierce because it's relationships between things, and science studies the thing. So dairy, cows, in the Western world, we think of cows when we think of dairy. Well, a lot of the other rest of the planet thinks of goats. Mm-hmm. And then, some places have seals or other animals that they think of with milk. But for us, it's cows. Regardless of, your animal of choice, there is definitely a connection between us and the animals that provide us this food that is beyond what science is going to be able to understand. It's too complex. It's relational. It can't be observed through reduction in a laboratory. It's something that needs to be understood and respected. And it sounds strange for somebody like me who has been sort of a science guy, a science geek. I finally realized the limits of science, and I'm starting to understand that there are connections in the world that are best left respected and adored and cherished rather than trying to stick in a lab and understand, because inevitably, as I mentioned at the top of the show, our response to finding problems is to try and add more science to fix any imperceived deficiency in what we discover. The reality is these connections, which I'm calling centropy, are often better left, unmolested. They sort of take care of themselves. We were better off in many ways before science came along.
You write that milk composition changes based on the time of day, even the mood of the cow. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I think the main component of that people would say is things like melatonin production, which is sort of a relaxation hormone. And it's generally understood that cows produce more melatonin at certain times of day. And in fact, there's a milk in Japan where they will hand milk the cow once a week at a certain time of day when melatonin production is maxed out. And I think they charge $350 a gallon for the milk.
Wow.
But there's a rise and fall to all these sorts of hormone production. This is why we get sleepy at night when it gets dark. This is why I don't wear sunglasses anymore, because I think our bodies are calibrated to thinking of, hey, it's very bright out. You need to produce more hormones of this or that to protect your skin from getting burnt. And, there's all sorts of mechanisms going on in our body that we don't quite understand, but that seem to do pretty well at preventing problems. But yeah, the cows, the one that comes to mind is the melatonin and the timing of that. I'm certain there are others, but that's really the one that I looked into.
Would it be a stretch to suggest that milk has an intelligence, that it is alive?
No, certainly that's not a stretch at all. Our bodies, human bodies, have far more microbes within them than we have human cells. We're like a giant walking coral reef of biological activity. It's not just us. We are more something else than we are us. It's a very strange thing to sort of come to terms with that. It feels a little disconcerting to think that as you will get out of bed and walk around the house and go to the bathroom or make your breakfast, that you've got more of something else in you and on you than you do you. But milk is the same way. Milk, in my mind, is the ultimate palette of microbial activity that gives your body an array of colors from which to paint the perfect picture of health. It's a complete biological wonder that your body can use and pluck and choose what it wants and what it needs to repopulate, what it wants to do away with. And it uses it in all kinds of ways. My suspicion is that milk grown in a pasture that you own, that you drink water from the soil that comes underneath it, that there's a lot of complexity going on there, that the interplay of all these things is very powerful and is probably designed or works, however you want to think of it, in such a way that your health is maximized. Unfortunately, we've broken these models, and we drink milk from 1,000 cows in pastures 1,000 miles away, with mineral profiles our bodies have never seen, and with no feedback mechanism that we can ever, actually communicate with the cycle that's going on. So I think there's an entire microbial network of communication that goes on that is essential for our health, and we've sort of broken it by not farming, by not eating the food we grow, by buying it in a store. And don't think I'm here preaching from a high horse here. I eat more food from a store than anyone. I'm trying to find ways to get back to growing our own food. It's very hard, and most people will know that. But yeah, there's definitely, milk has a communication layer with those people that consume it. There's all kinds of things going on there that we don't understand, and I'm happy to not understand. That's sort of the new me. I wanted to understand everything, and now I'm full of wonder. And I just want to shake my head in amazement and say, that's really amazing. I don't care if I understand every little protein and every little virus and bacteria and fungi and algae and whatever else. I just want to know that this works really well when done properly.
You're speaking with someone who grew up on powdered milk. I mean, came from
Right.
a large family. Milk was expensive. That was my job. I mixed the milk.
You were the original health nut.
Well, powdered milk, I don't know, but and then from there, of
No,
course.
you would have been a health nut if you drank powdered milk. Well, I'm not kidding. You were the
Really?
health nut. You were the crazy person for realizing that human milk was dangerous and that cow milk was dangerous, and you had the ultimate health food, powdered milk.
And then, of course, just pasteurized milk. I've never had raw milk. I'm assuming you have. I mean, describe it to people who've never had it. What's it
Yeah.
taste like?
It's remarkably similar. I was ready for a cathartic experience when I first drank raw milk. I really thought it was just going to be an incredible moment. And my main reaction was, it doesn't stick to my tongue it's gone. I drank it and it's completely gone from my mouth. There's no like tannin, like, stickiness. Like if you're a wine drinker, you might think of tannins and that sort of smackiness. There's none. It's absolutely gone. And I think my cows were eating strawberries. That was my other
Wow.
reaction was I think they were eating strawberries. I'm not sure, but it was remarkably uneventful. There was no gastronomic distress in any way. There wasn't the revelation of taste. I've heard some people say, if you get a really creamy mixture, which the best way to do that is if you're milking your own cow and they trust you and they'll give up their cream, that your milk starts to taste more like ice cream. Of course, it's not quite as sugary as ice cream,
Sign me up.
but exactly. But there is the notion that the creaminess of it is more rich and it's more like food, kind of like Guinness beer compared to like Bud Light or something. It feels more on the food side rather than the drink side. But I didn't have that sensation, and I think, or I haven't had that sensation, and I think it's most likely because the farmers we get our raw milk from are probably not getting a lot of cream out of their cows. It's not their fault. It's just the fact that some cows are picky and they don't want to give up their cream. They want to save it for their calf. Even if their calf has been taken from them, they'll still save it in hopes they can give it to their calf. So,
And anecdotally, or testimonial wise, what do people say who start drinking raw milk who have had, I don't know, various ailments? For example, let's start with something close to home here. I have a son who's suddenly lactose intolerant. I mean, is that a thing if you drink raw milk?
it can definitely, lactose intolerant is a very curious genetic or biological phenomenon that is difficult to explain. There are a lot of people who are unable to drink traditional dairy that can drink raw unpasteurized milk without a single issue. I've seen it firsthand myself with someone in my family, and it's remarkable to see someone who is essentially terrified of dairy be able to chug a glass of raw unpasteurized milk and have zero problems with it. So I would definitely encourage, giving it a shot. Of course, you might not want to drink a gallon of it first time around, just see how you do. But, there are things that if you've heard of the A2 cows, this is a genetic breed that's been becoming popular. It started in New Zealand, and there's a certain protein in milk that has like an A1 and an A2 variant. I think it's called beta casein. And you can basically weed out the cows that are A1, which is evidently the component of beta casein that some people can't tolerate. And so there's a lot of farmers, particularly the raw, unpasteurized milk farmers. They know people are particular about their dairy, and they have these A2 cows that don't produce that A1 protein. And there are a lot of people that thought they were lactose intolerant that can tolerate milk just fine as long as it comes from the A2 cows. So, and they sell pasteurized A2 milk. You may not have to skirt the law, depending on where you live and what the rules are about raw unpasteurized milk. You may be able to get pasteurized A2 milk. Now, unfortunately, pasteurization kind of wrecks the nutritional profile of milk, and all the stuff we've been talking about, all the amazing things, are basically nuked into oblivion. It's basically white, watery liquid at that point. And some people would say it's worse than that. It actually has detrimental effects to drink pasteurized milk. That certainly could be true. My thought is, it's probably not terrible to drink pasteurized milk. The homogenization process has its own. That's essentially where they obliterate the fat molecules in such a way they can control it. That's how they get skim milk or 1% or 2% milk. But I think in almost every way, natural is probably better. I know that sounds kind of obvious to say that, but I'm really starting to believe that natural is probably best, particularly with milk.
But what else are people saying about raw milk in terms of its benefits or its ability to help with certain ailments.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and in fact, people used to drink it. It was called the milk cure. There were people, Rockefeller, who's very famous for having sort of advertised $1 million reward for anyone that could solve his digestive issues, and no one could until a doctor said, "I'm going to put you on raw, unpasteurized milk for a month." And it worked, and he did it. He committed to it, and it worked. And there's the scene in the book where he has a party to celebrate, and he raises a toast with a tumbler full of raw unpasteurized milk. There's no wine. He wanted to, sort of announce that that's what he attributed his health to. And then Upton Sinclair, the famous author of The Jungle, he wrote very frequently about raw milk curing his ailments. So there's a lot to it. You may have had some success with probiotics before if you have gastrointestinal issues, certain supplements. Milk is sort of the ultimate probiotic in my mind. It is a intelligent probiotic that your body can use, as I mentioned earlier, as a palette of colors to choose from. It can discard what it doesn't need. It can employ what it does. And your body can do wonders if you sort of feed it. Pasteurized milk is essentially white water. There is nothing there that your body can make use of. It has a little bit of a taste to it, but otherwise it is an innocuous substance at best, possibly worse than that. But unpasteurized raw milk certainly has the potential to give your body the tools it needs to clear up all sorts of issues. And the human body is really good at healing. I mean, it really is. That is probably 90% of the wonder of life is not life itself, but its ability to heal. That is really the real wonder of the world. And your body wants to heal. It knows how to heal if you can just get out of the way and give it the tools it needs. And from what I can tell, raw unpasteurized milk is one of the greatest tools we have in our arsenal to feed your body what it might need to fix things.
You've exposed fraud in the polio narrative, in autism, in COVID, but this war on raw milk feels even more ancient, more primal. Why do you think milk, of all things, was the line they were so desperate to control?
Well, it became a big deal because of children. And when things start harming children, a lot of people get involved. It's understandably so. I mean, there are floods going on with children dying in floods, and people can't turn away from their screens because they are terrified that there are children that have died in these floods. So think about a disease, an ailment that was killing thousands and thousands of infants every summer. And this is what was happening during the 1800s, 20,000 infants in a single year. And as you mentioned at the top of the show, that's more infants that ever died from polio in the United States, ever. I'm not talking about in 1 year. I'm talking about cumulatively from the 1890s to present time. There were never that many infants that died from polio. So in 1 year, adulterated milk killed that many infants. And so understandably, a lot of people were concerned. When it came to the realization that it was likely the milk, the adulterated milk, that was causing the problem, it was a big deal. You can imagine. It was infants. They were dying by the thousands. And so people got very serious about fixing the problem. You can imagine all the politicians on the campaign trail, all the promises they made, the righteous, indignant anger they showed toward the perceived enemy, which was, farmers and the cows, and really the germophobia that was taking over the country at the time. I mean, that was essentially the heart of the matter. Was Louis Pasteur and Koch and these other guys were starting to expose this entire world of microbes that no one had ever heard of before. And they show these little illustrations in newspapers of these little critters that live in your intestines, and people were terrified. They were absolutely terrified. So the notion that they were feeding their children milk that had bacteria in it was absolutely horrific. They wanted the white water. They wanted the powdered milk. They wanted the scientific purity that infant formula promised. So I think children was the main problem. It was a big problem. killing so many, and they were right to try and fix it. It's just the approach they used was completely wrong.
It seems like there are sort of three, pun intended, sacred cows in health, public health. One was, let's say, fluoride in the water, vaccines, and then pasteurized milk. And we're seeing now that thanks to people such as yourselves and other courageous researchers and writers and advocates and so forth, and now Bobby Kennedy Jr. at the CDC, we're seeing serious fractures in this front. There are municipalities now that are taking fluoride out of their water. Now we're starting to seriously question the efficacy and safety of vaccines and the childhood schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to see the same thing? Is the same thing beginning to happen with the war on raw milk? I mean, I understand that there is a raw milk proponent who has been appointed by Bobby Kennedy. I don't know to which position, but within the CDC.
I've heard that. I'm same as you. I don't know who that is or what their platform is, but I think the promise of science is running out of steam. And that feels very sacrilegious to say, again, as someone who's kind of a science geek for most of my life. I think the promise of science and technology is running out of steam. I think people are starting to realize that it is not delivering on the promise that we were told. We have more chronic illness than any human population has ever had. We have more corruption in the food supply chain than we've ever had. In every measure, other than a lifespan, I suppose, human health has suffered for technology or since technology, since science. So I think there is a general rebellion brewing against the promise of industrialized medicine through pharma from COVID. There was a lot of people sort of turning during the COVID era due to frustration with mandates and lockdowns and these other things. That sort of definitely opened a lot of doors for people to start asking questions that they wouldn't have asked before. I think in general, there is a sense, be it governmental, be it health, be it pharmacological, I suppose, that there are big organizations who don't have your best interests in mind. And the scale of everything has grown to such a point that people are looking for smaller solutions. They are looking for their tribe. They are looking for their people. They are looking for their farmer. They are looking in every way for smaller solutions of people that can be held accountable when things go wrong. And the bigger a system becomes, the less accountable people become when things go wrong. Case in point with politics or food or vaccines. No one is going to go to jail for any of this, most likely. I hate to say that. Great crimes have been perpetrated against humankind, and most likely no one will go to jail. And that's the travesty of these enormously scaled nations, governments, corporations. They all preclude accountability in such a way that no one will ever have to spend a moment in jail. So they're very dangerous for that one fact alone. And I think a lot of people are getting sick of it. They want accountability. They want to know where their milk comes from. They want to know the farmer their milk comes from. So there are in a certain number of farmers that sell what they call single moo milk, which is a great term, and it's milk that comes from a certain cow. It's not commingled with every other cow on the farm. It's Daisy. Daisy loves strawberries, and you're going to love Daisy's milk. And so when you buy milk, you buy Daisy's strawberry milk. I mean, I'm not saying that's actually true, but I think that is the kind of thing you're going to see people move toward. I think the scale of modern civilization has gotten so enormous. I mean, think of all the phone trees you have to sort through. Anytime you try and cancel a service, you can sign up for a service in 5 minutes online, but to cancel it, you have to suffer through a phone tree and a call center of people that probably don't speak your language natively, and you have to wait for an hour. And people are very sick of that. They want accountability. They want smaller organizations. And so in every regard, I think people are starting to question anything that has a monster system around it, like vaccines, like fluoride, like pasteurized milk, for sure. They're starting to question them and say, maybe we were better off on our own. Or in the very least, maybe we were better off when we could hold people accountable for the mistakes they made. And we certainly can't do that with the current system.
The germ in the Dairy Pail, the 200-year war on the world's most amazing food, milk. Forrest, you've done it again. Congratulations. How do we get a copy?
Currently, you can get it on Amazon in print, digital, or audiobook. I will soon have it up on my website, forrestmaready.com. Either are fine. I don't care where you get it from, but I hope you will take a read. It's a fascinating story, and there's lots of new stuff in there that haven't been covered by the other milk books, according to those in the know. So I was glad, I looked down the crevices and the rabbit holes trying to find new information, and I was able to find some new stuff. So even if you read some of the other books, I think you'll find this one very interesting.
Forrest, thank you so much. You're a treasure. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Richard. Glad to be here.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.